Society is getting dumber. Here's the hidden system behind it. We live in an age where we have more information than ever, more access to knowledge, more tools to think, learn, and develop, and grow, but strangely, we seem to be getting dumber. Not individually, perhaps you might feel smart, curious, aware, but collectively, something is unraveling. Conversations are shallow. Attention spans are shorter. Critical thinking is being replaced by emotional reactivity. Nuance is dying. And the question is, why? Why, in a world where we can access the entire history of human thought with a few taps, are we drifting toward intellectual decay? The answer isn't random. It's not just about social media or bad education. The real answer is far darker. It's systemic. It's hidden. It was designed. And in this video, I'm going to show you the hidden system behind the dumbing down of society and, more importantly, what you can do about it. Let's begin where most people don't. Not with tech, not with politics, but with a philosophical principle. The human mind naturally seeks simplicity. Not because it's lazy, but because simplicity is efficient. We evolved to survive, not to deeply understand the universe. So we look for patterns, shortcuts, heuristics. That's fine when you're in a forest trying to spot danger. But in a modern, hyper-complex society, this instinct becomes a weakness. It makes us vulnerable to manipulation, but to propaganda, to oversimplified narratives that feel true but aren't. And here's the dangerous part: institutions, governments, corporations, media platforms know this. They know we crave simplicity, certainty, and emotional clarity. So they feed it to us, not to enlighten but to control. This is the hidden system, a feedback loop between our biological tendencies and a society built to exploit them. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you changed your mind about something important? Not something trivial like whether pineapple belongs on pizza, but about your worldview, your politics, your values? If you're like most people, the answer is either never or I don't remember. And that's terrifying. Because intelligence isn't just about knowing facts, it's about the capacity to change your mind when presented with better reasoning. But the system doesn't reward that. It punishes it. You're called a flip-flopper, a traitor, a sellout. So people double down. They cling harder to their mental tribes. And slowly, the ability to think flexibly dies.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now zoom out. Look at how we structure our institutions. School teaches obedience, not curiosity. It tells you what to think, not how to think. It rewards memorization, not exploration. Social media rewards outrage, not understanding. It amplifies simplistic narratives because they're easier to share, faster to consume, and more profitable for the algorithm. News media doesn't inform, it divides. It doesn't ask what's true. It asks what will make you click. In politics, it's not about solving problems, it's about winning attention. The loudest voice, the most extreme angle, the most emotionally charged take, that's what gets rewarded. And do you see the pattern yet? Every piece of this system is optimized for attention, not intelligence. And attention has become the new currency of power. But here's the paradox. What captures attention is rarely what cultivates wisdom. That's why philosophers are ignored and influencers are idolized. That's why deep books are unread while 10-second clips go viral. That's why people are more likely to know what a celebrity tweeted than what a philosopher once warned about tyranny, identity, or mass manipulation. And yet, the warnings are there. They've always been there. Plato warned about the dangers of democracy turning into mob rule. Nietzsche warned us about the death of truth in favor of comfort. Aldous Huxley warned us we'd drown in pleasure. Orwell warned us we'd be crushed by control. And ironically, both came true. We're being distracted and controlled, entertained into stupidity and guided into obedience. But this isn't a rant. This is a wake-up call. Because the system isn't going to change itself. It doesn't want to. It's working. That's the scary part. The system is functioning exactly as designed. And if you don't know how it works, you are being used by it. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And the system is designed for humans to hijack your instincts, your fears, your desires, your need to belong, your need to be right. And once it has you, it doesn't need to imprison your body. It only needs to capture your mind. So here's the question I want you to wrestle with. How many of your thoughts are truly your own? How many of your opinions were born from deep reflection versus passed to you by culture, media, school, or your social circle? If you didn't grow up in your country, your religion, your political environment, would you believe the same things? That question isn't meant to make you uncomfortable. It's meant to make you awake. Because here's the real tragedy. We're not being trained to think. We're being trained to react, to consume, to scroll, to vote, to obey, but not to pause, not to question, not to sit with ambiguity, but not to wrestle with contradictions. And that's what makes us dumber, not the lack of knowledge, but the death of intellectual courage. And once that dies, society doesn't collapse, it calcifies. It becomes a rigid machine, repeating patterns, stuck in loops, unable to evolve. But evolution is possible. Escape is possible. It starts with awareness. It starts with seeing the machine. And then, slowly, it starts with reclaiming your mind from it, not in one grand gesture, but in small, daily acts of rebellion. Choosing a book over a scroll, choosing silence over noise, choosing thought over reaction, choosing truth over comfort. Because once you see the system, you can start to dismantle it, not globally, but personally. And that is where the real revolution begins. The algorithmic cage, how technology hijacks your mind without you knowing. It's easy to think of technology as neutral, just tools, platforms, conveniences. We assume it's there to serve us, to make life easier, faster, more connected. But that's a dangerous illusion, because these tools aren't neutral and they're not free. They are designed intentionally, strategically to shape your thoughts, your behaviors, and ultimately, your identity. And the scariest part is that it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like choice, like freedom, like fun. But what if every swipe, every like, every notification is actually a string being pulled not by accident, but by design? This is the algorithmic cage, and you're in it. I'm in it. We all are. And until you understand how it works, you are not thinking freely. You are being thought through by systems that know you better than you know yourself. Systems that don't just track your behavior, but predict it, model it, and then shape it. Not to make you wiser, not to make you more conscious, but to keep you engaged, because engagement is profit. And in this economy, your attention is the product. Let's break this down. Every time you use a major platform, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, you're entering a space where the algorithm is learning from you in real time. Not just what you click, but how long you linger. What makes you pause? What makes you scroll faster? What your eyes are drawn to? What triggers your emotions? And over time it builds a profile not of who you say you are, but of who you really are, based on your digital behavior. That profile isn't just used to recommend content. It's used to shape the content that gets created in the first place. The algorithm doesn't just reflect culture, it engineers it. And here's the philosophical problem. When a machine is deciding what you see, you are no longer the author of your own experience. You are being fed a reality tailored to you, yes, but filtered, curated, and optimized for emotional reaction, not intellectual depth. The algorithm doesn't care if you're right or wrong. It doesn't care if you're wiser or dumber after spending an hour on the platform. It only cares that you stay, that you click, that you feel just enough outrage or curiosity or dopamine to keep your thumb moving. And this changes you, slowly, subtly, but absolutely. Now think about what that means for society. Millions of people, every day, being nudged by invisible code toward content that makes them more reactive, more tribal, more emotionally unstable. Critical thinking gets buried. Long-form attention dies. Echo chambers form. And because the system rewards extremity, the most polarized, simplistic, emotionally intense content rises to the top. Not because it's true, but because it performs. And that's how we get a dumber society. Not because people are incapable of thinking, but because the environment they live in is optimized to discourage it. It's like living in a casino designed by a philosopher king who decided that contemplation was bad for business. Every sound, every light, every motion is engineered to keep you distracted. But unlike a casino, you're not aware that you're being manipulated. There's no slot machine, just content, just information, just a stream of ideas that feels spontaneous but is anything but. And when you live in that stream long enough, you start to think it's the world. You forget there's an ocean outside the algorithmic bubble. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to read a book now? To sit in silence? To just think without needing to reach for your phone? That's not a personal failure. That's the effect of a system that has spent years rewiring your brain to crave novelty, speed, and stimulation. And the cost is massive. Because once your ability to focus dies, your ability to think deeply dies with it. And once that's gone, you're no longer a citizen, you're a consumer. You're no longer a mind, you're a metric. So what do? We unplug? We delete the apps? Maybe. But the deeper answer isn't about quitting technology. It's about reclaiming your relationship with it. You can't escape the digital world, but you can stop being owned by it. You can stop letting the algorithm parent your mind. And that starts with the simple, radical shift, becoming aware, watching the watcher, noticing when you're being pulled, asking yourself, why did I see this? Who benefits from me watching this? What part of me is being triggered right now? Because the moment you ask those questions, you're no longer inside the cage blindly. You're observing it, mapping it, and once you can see the bars, you can begin to bend them. You can start choosing what you consume instead of being consumed. You can create habits that defy the algorithm. You can slow down, go deeper, ask harder questions, and in doing so, you begin to reclaim your mind not just from technology, but from a society that profits off your passivity. The algorithm is not your enemy, but it will become your master if you don't wake up. And waking up is the beginning of intelligence, not just knowing more, but seeing more clearly. Manufactured consent, how institutions program your beliefs without you ever realizing it. Most people believe what they believe for reasons they've never examined. That's not an insult, it's a consequence of how systems work. Your worldview, your opinions, even your moral compass, they didn't appear in a vacuum. They were shaped, layer by layer, experience by experience, phrase by phrase, and what's most alarming is how subtle that shaping is. You don't wake up one day and say, "I'll adopt this ideology." You absorb it through school, media, culture, language until it feels so normal, so obvious, that questioning it feels like heresy. But what if most of what you believe isn't yours at all? What if your consent to the way the world works has been quietly manufactured? The concept of manufactured consent comes from Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, who argued that mass media doesn't just report the world, it filters it. But it doesn't just show you facts, it shows you which facts matter, how they matter, and what you should think and feel about them. But that idea goes far beyond media. It applies to every institution that touches your mind. From the moment you're born, you're immersed in systems that reward conformity and discourage true inquiry. School teaches you a version of history that flatters the victors and edits out the rebels. News outlets present narratives, not just news. Political discourse is framed as a binary, forcing you to pick a side instead of ask better questions. And religion, when institutionalized, often becomes less about seeking truth and more about preserving power. Ask yourself, when you were a child, did you choose what to believe about your country, your religion, your values, or were they handed to you before you even had the tools to evaluate them? And later, when you began to question if you ever did, were you encouraged to explore openly? Or were you subtly punished, laughed at, shamed? That's how belief systems maintain themselves, not through open debate, but through social pressure, and through fear of isolation, through the illusion that everyone else agrees, so you must be wrong. And this is where it gets philosophical. Because if your beliefs can be programmed without you even realizing it, then who are you really? If your opinions are just echoes of the institutions that raised you, then what does it mean to think freely? And how do you even begin to separate your authentic voice from the noise of your conditioning? The answer begins with awareness. You must become a philosopher of your own mind. You must interrogate every assumption, every belief, every truth you were handed, not to discard them recklessly, but to earn them, to make sure they are yours, not someone else's. That's what real freedom is. Not doing whatever you want, but knowing why you want it. Not just believing, but understanding the roots of belief. But be warned, this process is uncomfortable, because it forces you to admit that you might have been wrong, that your worldview might be built on shaky ground, that the institutions you trusted, school, government, media, even your family, may have had agendas, biases, blind spots. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice how every headline is framed to evoke a specific reaction, how every curriculum leaves out inconvenient truths, how every political debate is structured to polarize, not to enlighten. And you begin to see the machinery behind the curtain. Now here's the twist. The system doesn't need you to agree with it. It only needs you to stay within it. You can be liberal or conservative, religious or atheist, capitalist or socialist, as long as your identity is tied to one of the pre-approved labels. Because the moment you step outside, the moment you start asking questions that don't fit the binary, you become dangerous. You become unclassifiable. You stop being a cog and start becoming a creator. And the system has no script for that. So here's a question to sit with. If you had been born in a different country, with different parents, different schools, different media, would you believe the same things you do now? If not, then which version of you is right? The one you are, or the one you could have been? That's not a question to answer quickly. That's a question to live inside. The truth is, most people never ask it. They live their whole lives inside a worldview that was built for them, never realizing it's a cage. A comfortable cage, maybe. A familiar one. But a cage nonetheless. And the only way out is philosophical courage, the willingness to deconstruct, to doubt, to dig deep, and to stop outsourcing your mind. Because once you realize that your consent has been manufactured, you start to take it back. You start to choose your beliefs instead of inheriting them. You start to question the narratives, not just the facts. And that's when you stop being a passive participant into society and start becoming a conscious creator of it. The final awakening, how to reclaim your mind and escape the invisible prison. If you've made it this far, something in you is already waking up. A quiet voice beneath the noise, whispering that the world you've inherited, the beliefs, the systems, the habits is not the only version of reality available to you. That voice is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is the beginning of truth, because the real prison is not made of walls or laws or even corrupted institutions. It's made of unconsciousness. It's the invisible prison of living a life you never examined, of thinking thoughts that were never truly yours, of mistaking comfort for clarity. And the final awakening begins when you stop trying to fix the system from within and start freeing yourself from the system entirely. Let's be clear, this isn't about escaping society physically. But it's not about running off into the woods or deleting every app or rejecting everyone who disagrees with you. That would be another form of reaction, another way to be controlled by the very thing you think you're escaping. No, this escape is internal, philosophical. It's about reclaiming the sovereignty of your own mind. It's about choosing to no longer be a passive endpoint for the world's programming. It's about becoming conscious not just of what's around you, but of what's within you. That starts with stillness, with silence, with stepping away from the noise long enough to hear your own thoughts without interference. Can you do that? Can you sit in a room without reaching for a screen, a distraction, a validation loop? Most people can't. They've been conditioned to fear that silence because it threatens the identity the system gave them. But in that silence is where the real work begins. You start to notice the layers of programming, how your thoughts are shaped by fear of judgment, how your desires are shaped by comparison, how even your goals may be nothing more than echoes of someone else's expectations. And slowly, if you're honest, you begin to strip those layers away. Then comes the harder part, responsibility. Because once you realize that you've been living in a mental cage, the next question is, what will you do about it? It's tempting to stay in the comfort of awareness without moving into action, to say, yes, I see the system, but continue living as if you don't. That's not awakening. That's intellectual entertainment. Real awakening is painful. It requires death, and the death of old identities, the death of borrowed beliefs, the death of the version of you that was built by others. But in that death, something astonishing happens. A new self begins to emerge, not a perfect self, not a fully formed one, but an authentic one. A self that asks better questions, that listens more deeply, that acts with intention instead of impulse. And that self builds a new kind of life. Not one dictated by algorithmic suggestion, but by inner alignment. Not one governed by tribal loyalty, but by universal truth. Not one lived for performance, but for presence. That doesn't mean disengaging from the world. It means re-entering it on your own terms, choosing what to consume, who to listen to, what to question, what to create, and above all, choosing to live by values you've examined, not ones you inherited blindly. So here's the final question. What would your life look like if every belief, every action, every goal was chosen by your highest awareness, not your fear, not your programming, not your past, but your clearest, most conscious self? That question is not meant to inspire you. It's meant to challenge you, because answering it requires work, daily work, philosophical work. It requires becoming a mirror for truth in a world addicted to illusion. But that's the point. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more clarity. It doesn't need more followers. It needs more awakened minds. Minds that are no longer hijacked by systems, but guided by wisdom. Minds that have seen the prison, walked through it, and emerged on the other side not as rebels, but as creators. Not as victims, but as visionaries. You are not here to repeat the cycle. You are here to break it. And it starts with a single decision to wake up and never go back to sleep.